Hello everyone, welcome back again. And guess what? Today we're diving into American literature. We'll be starting with chapter 1 from our book, Foundations of American Literature, covering the period from pre-1600 to 1830. All right, let's set the stage for something often overlooked but deeply essential. Before the first English word was ever etched onto American soil, this land was alive with story, spoken, sung, and shared. Indigenous cultures flourished across what we now call the United States, each with their own language, rituals, and mythic traditions. They didn't write books the way we know them, but that doesn't mean they didn't create literature, quite the opposite. Their knowledge lived in oral tradition stories passed on not for entertainment alone, but for survival, for ceremony, and for identity. Paula Gunn Allen puts it beautifully when she says, "Oral tradition is not merely a set of texts. It is a way of life, a mode of knowing and transmitting knowledge." And when you hear a story like the Sky Woman myth from the Iroquois or the Navajo tales of emergence, you realize it's not just narrative. It's cosmology. It's history, spirit, and place woven together. This is where American literature really begins, not with print, but with presence. Now, shift gears with me for a moment because while native traditions were thriving here, something entirely different was happening across the ocean. In late 16th century England, writers and explorers were dreaming up a new world, not as it truly was, but as they imagined it. America became a blank canvas, ready to carry their hopes, their fears, and frankly, their imperial agendas. Think about this. Sir Walter Raleigh described Guyana as a country that hath yet her maidenhead. That language, it's not just poetic, it's possessive. It reveals how the land was romanticized, even sexualized, as something to conquer. Writers like Richard Hakluyt added fuel to this fantasy. In his principal navigations, he turned America into a kind of Eden, a place divinely chosen for English destiny. But all of this, as critic Peter Hulme points out, was less discovery and more invention. America existed in English literature long before it did in colonial reality. Crafted at the crossroads of commerce, Christianity, and conquest. And then the imagined gave way to the real. In the year 1607, Jamestown was born. 13 years later, the Puritans set foot at Plymouth. But what's fascinating is how different their intentions were. While the South sought land and profit, the Puritans were chasing a moral vision, a divine experiment. On board the Arbella, John Winthrop preached a model of Christian charity, casting his fellow settlers as chosen people tasked with building a city upon a hill. Their literature mirrored this mission. The Bay Psalm book, printed in 1640, wasn't just a collection of religious songs. It was a statement, a way to claim spiritual authority in a new world. And then there's Mary Rowlandson. Her captivity narrative, it turned personal trauma into public theology. As literary scholar Sakwan Berkowitz puts it, these writers transformed individual suffering into something sacred, something communal. Let's pause and reflect here. Even at this early stage, American literature wasn't just about recording life. It was about assigning meaning to it. As we move forward, you'll see that early colonial texts weren't written to impress. They were written to endure. Think of John Smith's description of New England. It's both a sales pitch and a survival guide. William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation? It reads like scripture, positioning the Puritans as a second Exodus. But here's the thing. Beneath the religious tone and practical purpose, you start to feel something stirring. A new kind of voice. A distinctly American one. Rooted in English style, yes, but slowly reshaped by wilderness, struggle, and the dream of independence. Over time, this voice would evolve, reaching westward, inward, and outward. It would confront expansion, grapple with freedom, and question what it meant to belong. And by the end of the 19th century, American literature wasn't just responding to its own history. It was keeping pace with the rise of science, the shocks of war, the tremors of migration, and the noise of industry. To sum it up, the story of American literature begins long before America itself, and it continues to grow line by line with every shift in how we live, think, and feel. As we move deeper into the 18th century, American literature stands at a crossroads, caught between the fire of Puritan faith and the cool logic of Enlightenment reason. It all began with voices like Cotton Mather, who tried to preserve the spiritual legacy of New England's founders. Jonathan Edwards carried that tradition forward, his sermons sparking the Great Awakening with emotional force and theological depth, but others pushed back. John Wise and Jonathan Mayhew began linking faith with freedom, challenging church authority in the name of civic liberty. Meanwhile, writers like Samuel Sewall, Sarah Kemble Knight, and William Byrd brought a more observational, even satirical, tone turning inward and outward in equal measure. By the time revolutionary ideals took hold, literature had become political. Thomas Paine's Common Sense and John Dickinson's Farmer Letters fueled the call for independence. Franklin's autobiography and Poor Richard's Almanac gave voice to Enlightenment ideals, blending personal discipline with public good. This was the American Enlightenment in full swing, a time when writers turned away from religious introspection and toward reason, science, and reform. Inspired by thinkers like John Locke and Montesquieu, Franklin modeled the power of planning and self-made success. Paine, with his bold and burning prose, made radical ideas accessible to everyday readers. Together, they redefined American prose, making it not just a reflection of self, but a tool for revolution. Now let's talk about a voice that lit the fire of revolution. Thomas Paine. Born in 1736, Paine became one of the 18th century's most powerful political writers. His breakthrough came with Common Sense, published in 1776. In it, he didn't just criticize monarchy, he tore it down, writing, "The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind." His words were simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. That same year, as the war raged on, he began the American Crisis essays. The opening line, instantly iconic. These are the times that try men's souls. Even after the revolution, Paine kept pushing. In The Rights of Man, he defended the French Revolution and demanded universal suffrage. And in The Age of Reason, he challenged organized religion, insisting that reason, not revelation, should guide belief. Controversial? Absolutely. But also courageous. Paine made literature a weapon for freedom, for justice, and for truth. For your UGC NET exam, it's important to remember Thomas Paine's major works in the correct order. Let's use the first middle last formula to keep it simple. First, we start with his most famous pamphlet, Common Sense, published in 1776. This is where it all began, his bold call for American independence. Last, we place The Age of Reason, written between 1794 and 1807. This was his dazed critique of institutional religion and his final major work. Now, to anchor the middle, we'll use this easy mnemonic. The Paine is a common sense among the American crisis for public good, declared by the affairs of government, which is the basic right of a man in this age of reason. Let's break it down. Common Sense, 1776. The American Crisis. The American Crisis, 1776 to 1783. Public Good, 1780. Dissertation on Government. The Affairs of the Bank and Paper Money, 1786. The Rights of Man, 1791 to 1792. The Age of Reason, 1794 to 1807. Keep this code in mind and you'll never forget the order. It's short, smart, and exam friendly. Let's now meet the man who turned folklore into national memory. Washington Irving, Born in 1783, Irving became the first true American literary celebrity. His sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, published between 1819 and 1820, gave us Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Two tales that brought Dutch-American folklore to life with humor, nostalgia, and quiet political reflection. What made Irving stand out was his elegant prose, deeply influenced by British essayists, but rooted in American soil. He wrote about the Hudson River Valley, about change, memory, and identity. And his alter egos, like Geoffrey Crayon and Diedrich Knickerbocker, made the boundary between writer and nation feel fluid. As Perry Miller said, Irving helped Americans imagine themselves into their past, and in doing so, he laid the foundation for American myth-making, bridging Enlightenment rationality with romantic imagination. Now, picture this. A lone figure moving through the forest, rifle in hand, caught between nature and the coming storm of civilization. That's Natty Bumppo and his creator, James Fenimore Cooper. Born in 1789, Cooper was one of the first American novelists to earn fame across the Atlantic. His breakthrough came with The Spy, but it was the Leatherstocking Tales, written from 1823 to 1841, that carved his place in literary history. Through 5 novels, including The Pioneers, The Last of the Mohicans, and The Deerslayer, Cooper gave us a frontier hero with many names: Hawkeye, Pathfinder, Leatherstocking. These stories captured the tension between wilderness and progress, between indigenous life and settler expansion. The Last of the Mohicans became the most iconic weaving adventure with questions of race, identity, and loyalty. And with the pilot, Cooper even turned to the sea, showing his range and naval roots. He didn't just write history, he mythologized it, helping define what it meant to be American through the trials of the untamed frontier. Now, from an exam perspective, especially for UGC NET, this chapter is not usually a heavy hitter. But when a question does appear, it's either about Thomas Paine or something broader, like the major literary movements in American literature arranged chronologically. And that's where you need to be smart, because remembering the exact order of these movements can be tricky unless you apply the method we've used before: first, second, middle, second last, and last. This time, we'll also use memory codes to anchor the long list in your mind. So let's start at the top. The first major movement in American literature is Puritanism and colonial literature. That's our starting point. Right after that comes the second phase, which is the Enlightenment and revolutionary literature. These two movements shaped the moral and rational foundation of early American writing. Now let's jump to the end. The last literary period is easy to remember. It's the contemporary or postmodernist era. Just before that, we place the second last, which is the Native American Renaissance. This movement brought forth indigenous voices, identity, and reclamation into modern American literature. Now comes the longest part, the middle movements. But don't worry, we'll break it down into 4 simple codes that do all the heavy lifting for you. Here's the first code. Mr. Puritan is a colonel who enlightens the whole American nation from American Renaissance and Transcendental or. And that movement became the Young America movement. It might sound funny, but it's powerful. This one sentence helps you remember the following sequence: Puritanism, colonial literature, Enlightenment, revolutionary literature, American nationalism, American Renaissance, Transcendentalism, and the Young America movement. Now, let's move to Code 2. And here's how it goes. American Gothic came way before realism and naturalism. This tells us that American Gothic was already taking root in the cultural psyche before writers turned toward realism and naturalism. The shift is from the mysterious to the mundane, from haunted woods to hard facts. Now to Code 3. American modernism came before the Harlem Renaissance. And that's exactly how you remember it. Modernism arrives first, exploring fragmentation, alienation, and new literary forms. The Harlem Renaissance follows, centering African American voices, jazz, rhythms, and cultural assertion in the early 20th century. And finally, we close the middle block with Code 4. Let's beat, then confess the black arts of Native American. This line gives you the final wave of powerful movements: the Beat Generation, confessional poetry, the Black Arts movement, and then Native American Renaissance, which you already know comes just before the present-day literary scene. So let's recap. Your first movement is Puritanism, your second is Enlightenment, your last is Contemporary. Just before that, the second last is the Native American Renaissance. And in the middle, we remember everything else using these 4 codes. Once you speak them out loud a few times, they stick. That's the trick, turning complexity into rhythm. So that brings us to the end of Chapter 1 of American Literature. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it helpful. In our next session, we'll step into Chapter 2, where we explore American Romanticism and the American Renaissance, covering the years from 1830 to 1865. Trust me, it's going to be a powerful chapter filled with poetic voices, big ideas, and some of the most iconic names in American literary history. And don't forget to check out the PYQs and MCQs I've linked just below this video. Practice them, revise with intention, and build that confidence one step at a time. Take care, and I'll see you in the next session. Have a wonderful day ahead.